Welcome to Tales from Flat Space, a podcast of science fiction and fantasy by yours truly, Gina A. Pond. Just know that the stories in this podcast may contain content that could be disturbing to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. So, The Four Keys is my first long-form stories, and it was a story I had in my head for a long time, and the spirits that I work with, because I am wicked, wanted the story written, and so I wrote it for them. The Western City. When the water receded, Crow and I were standing on a beach of white sand. It seemed to stretch on forever in each direction. I released Crow and let him fly around. Everything was quiet except for the waves and the flapping of the crow's wings. I walked towards the waterline. I wasn't sure what to expect here, but I still felt at ease. The sounds of the water were soothing, and the breeze from the water was refreshing. The difficulties of the last 3 cities seemed far away, and I felt at home. The memories were not gone completely, but they seemed to be put into a new perspective. I longed to put my feet in the ocean and feel the cool water on my skin. I dropped my bag, took off my clothes and shoes, and began to walk into the waves. I looked at the blue key in my hand and saw that now it had a long string attached to it. I put the key around my neck. Crow landed on my bag and asked, "Are you going into the water? Do I watch over your shinies now?" "Yes, little brother, I'm going into the water. Take care of my shinies while I'm gone." I was so focused on getting in the water that I didn't stop even while I was talking to Crow. He cawed as I walked forward. As the water enveloped me, it felt as if it was caressing me. I felt more and more at home as the water came to my waist, then my chest, then over my head where I had to tread water. I closed my eyes and leaned back to float. The water filled my ears, putting me in near total silence. When I opened my eyes again, I could see the stars overhead and a full moon was rising. It was so beautiful it filled me with awe. After what seemed like a lifetime of floating in the ocean, I felt a presence near me. I turned my head and saw a beautiful but monstrous woman sitting on the water. Her hair was made of seaweed, and she had scales that shone like blue, green, and gold jewels in the moonlight. She reached over, took my key in her hand for a moment to examine it, and then gave it back to me. "So, you have finally come to my realm." I righted myself, and the water drained out of my ears. Yes," I said. I hesitated. The words I wanted would not come. "Oh, my love, I understand. You are a creature of this realm, even though you are human." She sunk into the water so that we could look each other in the eyes. Her eyes were such a deep blue that I could see waves in her eyes. Recognition came from the depths of my mind. This was Cedo, mother of the sea and mother of the sea monsters. She smiled. "Oh, how I wish you could be mine fully, but you are only human. Even though you cannot live in my realm, I know you enjoy being in it. The waters will always be home for you, my love. Maybe more so than Earth, eh?" As she spoke, she moved forward and caressed me as the water had caressed my skin. It felt light and cool and sensual. "I'm not jealous, really, that they initiated you first. But just remember, little one, that you will always be mine. Another child of mine, a beautiful monster." She pulled me into a tight hug and then said, "Ah, look, the mermaids have come to give you the ocean's lessons." She kissed me on the forehead. "May the waters bring you wisdom, my love. Remember that you will always have a home here," she said, and melted into the depths. Stunned, I felt the burning of her lips on my head, as if the universe had just been installed in the center of my forehead. There was a light and joyful laughter near me, and when I came out of my thrall, I realized that there were several merpeople in a circle around me. They were all different colors, from the human tans and browns to the green, blues, and golds of fish scales. Some of them were more fish than human. They were all beautiful and decorated with shells and stone and blue, green, and gold tattoos. "We're not quite what you imagined, are we?" I turned to the mer person who spoke. "No, not really. All I have to go on are stories of you, and all of them are written by humans." They smiled. "That is true. Introductions, I think, would be proper. I am the high priestess of the merfolk, Marina, and these are my fellow priests. We have come to initiate you into the depths. Have you the key? A rush of excitement washed over me, and I pulled the blue key from around my neck. It was now glowing bright yellow-green like phosphorant algae. I gave it to the high priestess, and she took it into her hands. The key began to melt and flow like water into an upside-down blue triangle. The string became a chain that reattached itself to the flat end of the triangle. Marina placed it over my neck. This is the symbol of water in our realm. It will allow you to be one of us for the time that you are here, and for the times in the future when you need to come to us. As she spoke the words, I could feel my body changing. My legs stopped treading water and came together, and I could feel gills on the side of my throat. The water triangle and the chain melted into my skin and looked like the tattoos that the other merfolk wore. I gave an experimental swish of my tail and flopped forward. There was a gentle laughter around me as I came up sputtering. Well, well, Marina said. You make quite an attractive merperson. It'll be a shame for you to leave us once your initiation is over. We could always use extra hands in the temple. She motioned towards two of the other merfolk, one that had more human features with long hair and breasts, and another that was more androgynous and had scales over half their face. This is Poe and Ebb. They will escort you through the city to the ancient trench that is sacred to our priesthood. From there you will be on your own. I understand. I bowed my head to the high priestess and then nodded to the two merfolk. Thank you. Poe and Ebb both smiled mischievously, grabbed my arms, and pulled me under the water. At first I tried to hold my breath, but as we moved I could feel the water flow through my new gills, forcing me to let out the last of the air from my lungs. I could feel the oxygen from the water in my blood, which felt almost too pure for my body. I swam forward a bit and felt a rush of excitement as I realized I could really breathe under the water. Poe and Ebb took my hands and began to lead me further on. The rest of the priests followed. We couldn't talk well under the water, but I could feel Poe and Ebb's thoughts through our touch. My mind translated the thoughts into sentences. Come, little sister, let us show you the wonders of our city, Poe said. Yes, let's, said Ebb. I nodded, and they led me forward. Poe and Ebb were as good as their word. After some time, I could see what seemed to be lights coming up from the bottom of the ocean. As we got closer, I could see bioluminescent lights, paintings on the walls, and spires made of corals and shells. There were areas that were like streets and town squares where merfolk gathered, and with statues of merfolk from ancient times. Many of the merfolk came out to wave as we passed. Every so often, one of the other priests moved off with others who came by. The circle of merfolk escorting me shrank as we moved to the far side of the city until it was just the high priestess, Poe, and Ebb. We came to an area that was quiet and still and felt sacred. We stopped in front of what looked like a large temple. Marina took my hands. Be strong, my dear, and come back to us. She squeezed my hands again, with worry and anticipation clear through her touch. She let go and went into the temple. Poe and Ebb, now with serious looks on their faces, motioned me to follow them. We swam round the temple and away from the city. After a while, the schools of fish became fewer, and there was less coral and other sea life on the sandy floor. Poe and Ebb led me further into this empty place, to a spot where it was flat except for a dark opening in the sea floor. The two led me over to where several large stones with ancient symbols were piled up. Ebb swam over to the stones and picked up two large ones, while Poe took my hand. Hold on to the rocks and swim into the trench. The rocks will help you sink into the depths. When you are done, drop the rocks and you will float back up here. Be of good courage and return, my friend. Then they kissed me, touched my face, and let go of my hand. I gasped as Ebb handed me the stones. They were heavy enough to make me sink, but not so heavy that I couldn't hold them. They also had handles so I could grip them better. Ebb smiled, and I could feel their amusement at Poe kissing me, and the suspicion that Ebb will keep Poe occupied while they were waiting for me to return. I smiled at them, and Ebb swam off to be with Poe. I adjusted the stones in my hands, swam forward, and let the stones carry me into the depths. I sank. I was surrounded by complete darkness. The only way I knew which way was up, after a few minutes, was the fact that the stones were pulling me down. The darkness felt somehow more oppressive in the water, more so than when I was in the earth. It felt to me that the line of life and death was much closer here. I could feel the pressure increase, and if I hadn't been protected by the merfolk magic, I knew I would be dead. Then a part of myself asked, what if you just let go? What if you just surrendered to the darkness? I froze. The stones were still letting me sink, but the rest of me stayed still. Did I want to die? I thought for a moment. If I was honest with myself, I just didn't know. There were times in the mortal world where I wanted to die, to surrender to my sadness, to come back to this world instead of returning to the mundane world. I kept sinking. I could feel the pressure building. My brain went still. No more questions, no more doubts. Just me and the water. And the thought that I could live here as Sita wished. Here where there was nothing but darkness, no demands, no doubt, no fear, just darkness. I kept sinking. I started to feel stirrings of something around me, light touches like little fish. There were specks of light in the darkness that were the same bioluminescence as the pictures on the walls of the merfolk buildings. They glowed like stars around me, with some of the stars being brave enough to come up to the intruder in their midst. I felt their curiosity and their suspicion. Who was this creature, they seemed to ask. Suddenly I felt the water rushing by me, and all the smaller specks of light swam away. When I felt it again, I could see a streak of light swim past me, larger than any of the other lights. With one last rush of water, the creature wrapped itself around me. When the water settled, I could see it was a serpent. Unlike the dragon of earth, the serpent of the water was not slow. He startled me so much that I dropped the stones I was holding. He spoke. Do you think that even here we don't have responsibility? Do you want to live down here in the deep, consuming the dead? Do you think that if you come this deep that you don't feel? That you don't care? All the lost souls come to me. Do you really want to be my queen? He kept squeezing me tighter and tighter. My survival instinct started to kick in, and I tried to get out of his coils, but nothing I did made a difference. Surrender to me, and I will make you my queen. Surrender to me, and you won't have to care about the mundane world again. Let me bring you into the depths. In time, you will be forgotten by everyone. It was a tempting offer. Why should I bother with the other worlds, especially the mundane world? Why should I care about others when I can't save or protect them all? But a small part of my brain began to worry. What would happen if I died here? What happens to those that I love and care about? And a smaller voice in the water said, You are a light in the darkness. You have hope when others have none. You will teach them how. As a hook on a lure, my mind caught onto that little spark of hope. A teacher? I suppose that's true. I suppose I do have a purpose. The small voice said, You cannot teach if you allow the depths to master you. I understood and made my decision. No, I said to the serpent. No, I will not be your queen. I do care. I do have hope. I can't surrender to you. I have too much work to do. I felt the serpent loosen his grip on me. Never have I been so sad or so happy to lose. Remember, even the smallest spark of hope can light the darkness. It is always tempting to surrender to the darkness, and some do. But if you can see that spark of hope, you will always find a way out. He unwrapped himself for me, and I started to rise. I felt some smaller fish bumping into my hands. I lifted my hands, and 2 smaller serpents dropped something into them. I could feel it was a shell. Take this and use it to see into those places that can't be seen. Sometimes it takes your spark of hope for others to see any hope at all, one of the smaller serpents said. I thanked him and started to drift up. I looked down. The larger serpent spiraled back into the depths. Part of my heart still longed to be with him, but I knew that my purpose needed to be fulfilled. I held the shell tightly and began to swim faster. I felt much lighter as I rose through the trench. About halfway up, I remembered that I had a tail and fins and used them to go faster. Before I realized it, I had shot out of the trench and past Poe and Ebb. I couldn't help it. I needed to see the open sky again. I could feel that the others had seen me swimming out of the trench and that they followed after me. But I wanted air. I wanted the sun. The depths here were comforting, but I couldn't stay there. I just kept swimming, faster and faster, up and up, until I reached the surface. I was swimming so fast that when I broke the surface, I actually jumped out of the water and nearly fell onto Ebb and Poe. I submerged again slightly, and then when I came back up, I gasped while air filled my lungs. I shifted to floating on my back, letting all that I had learned fill me. I wasn't sure exactly where I was going from here, now that I'd learned the lessons of all the cities, but I knew I had to move forward, to use what I know to teach others, to be an example to others. My mind seemed to have so many ideas that it was flailing. While I was floating there, I felt Poe and Eb swimming around me. They didn't speak, but just wrapped themselves around me, and I accepted their love and comfort. There were no words between us, just the feeling of love, comfort, and community. How long we floated together like that, I didn't know. The sky became darker, and it seemed like night, since the stars were large and bright. I let myself cry and sleep and breathe with Poe and Eb by my side. Eventually we could feel movement in the water. We all shifted so that we were upright. There were small luminescent creatures around us as the high priestess Marina came towards us. "So, you have survived. I'm glad that you have returned. The depths are always a difficult test, but now it's time for you to continue your journey. Come, let us get closer to shore." She turned and started swimming. The three of us followed. It seemed that the trench was a good deal further from the point where I had started. I smiled to myself, thinking that was an apt metaphor of my tired journey so far. I was going to miss being a merperson, but I know I had work to do elsewhere. I also knew that I could come back to the waters when I needed to. It was then that I remembered that I was still holding the shell that the serpent had given me, that would let me see anything I wished. No, I wasn't going away forever. I was just going back to the mortal world until my time there ends. Marina stopped, and we all swam up behind her. I could see the shore from where I was. Next to my pile of clothes, there was a bright campfire with a man sitting next to Crow. They were talking. The man seemed familiar, but I couldn't see him clearly from where we were. "Looks like you have someone waiting for you," Marina said. "Yes, so it would seem. It is time." I nodded. I turned to Poe and Eb. They were crying, but also smiling. I held open my arms, and we all hugged. The emotions that they passed to me were deep and true, and I knew I would miss them dearly. I passed them my love in return and told them that I would come back again. After a moment, they let go, holding each other's hand, and they swam away. I turned back to Marina. "I'm ready now." She nodded. "Let me hold your shell while you change." I gave her the shell, which I could now see was pale white and translucent with flecks of gold. It was more of a bowl shape than other shells. It was big enough to put water in, but not so big that it couldn't be handled. Marina admired it for a moment, then put her hand to my head. My body shifted and changed, and suddenly I had 2 legs and the gills were gone. The chain with the water symbol became a necklace once more. It felt strange to be human again, and a little sad. Marina gave me back the shell. "Put the necklace in it." I took the chain off and put it in the shell. The shell glowed for a moment in my hand, so much so I had to close my eyes. When the glowing stopped, the shell and chain had transformed into a pale white bowl where the top of the bowl was ringed with white pearls, and in the bottom of the bowl, in pale blue mother of pearl, was the water symbol. Marina nodded approvingly. "When you need us, or when you need to see the currents of the universe, fill this bowl with water and call on us. We will help you figure out which way the currents are moving." She put her hand on my head again, in blessing. "May you be blessed on your journey, and may you find all that you are looking for. I name you a priest of the waters, and you are welcome back to us any time you wish." I threw my arms around her and hugged her. I could feel her surprise, but then she laughed and hugged me back. "Yes, well, we are an emotional bunch, us water folk. Be blessed and be well, my friend." She pulled away and gestured to the shore. "They are waiting for you." "Yes, thank you," I said, "for everything." Marina smiled, waved, and swam away. I watched her go for a moment, then turned towards the shore. On the shore. I emerged from the water dripping cold and naked. I was focusing on the fire, since I was shivering from the cold night air. The man by the fire stood up as I approached, came out to where I was, and wrapped me in a large white cloth. When I finally looked at him, I realized that it was Jesus. He smiled a warm smile and guided me over to the fire. Crow cawed happily and jumped onto my shoulder, giving me a gentle peck with his beak on my head. "You said you would come back. It was so long, at least 2 sleeps." Really? I said. Has it been that long? Oh, yes, Crow replied. But he came and sat with me after the first sleep. We talked about a lot of things. You did? Well, I'm glad Jesus came to sit with you. I turned to him and said, Thank you, truly. He smiled. He was a good companion. Even I didn't know when you would return from the depths or if you would return at all. But I'm happy to see that you have. He paused. What is in your hand? It is the bowl of the water serpent. The bowl was a gift from the serpent, and the pearls were a gift from the high priestess of the merfolk. I held it out for him to see. He took it and looked it over. Yes, this is beautiful work. Powerful, too. You have learned much on your journey so far. I nodded. He gave me back the bowl, and I put it into my bag with all the other gifts from the cities. Looking at all the gifts, it dawned on me that I wasn't the same person I was when I started this journey. Then I was only a writer. Now I was an initiated priest of water and earth, had the knowledge of air and fire, and knew ways to share this knowledge with others. I am so much more now, I thought. We all sat quietly next to the fire. Crow hopped into my lap, tucked in his feet, and fell asleep to me caressing his head. Jesus and I sat with each other for a while like that, just being with each other. It felt as if we had all the time in the world. I jumped a little when Jesus finally broke the silence. He asked, quietly, You don't have the same questions as before, do you? I shook my head. No. He nodded. I know you still honor me in your practice, and if you wish to be mine still, I would like that. Right now, I need you more than ever. There are many people hurting in your world. They need to see what love and compassion is, and their differences. They need to know what inclusion is. You and those like you need to be the ones to bring the change this time. I lived during a similar time. It took me to come to your world and my death to deliver the message. There weren't as many people on the earth then, and the message was still lost on many. But this time you humans have to do it. So many humans talk about me coming back, but I can't. I can't and won't return to your world. Not as a human, anyway. But I don't need to. You and those who preach inclusion are my second coming. You preach the message that I was trying to get across so very long ago. Maybe even better than I did. They will hate you. They will tell you that it's not my way. But that's not true. Love is my way. It always has been. The Bible has many truths in it, and I'm grateful for those who chose to write the story of my life down, but it is not written in stone, and only through the eyes of men. No one really needs to use the Bible to know me. Like that pastor you're so fond of said, the Word of God is you. You are the living example of God's glory, all of you. There is no one that is exempt from that. It hurts to see that there are so many who hate my name. Please believe me, I didn't want that. I never wanted wars or death in my name. His voice cracked a bit, and I could see that there were tears in his eyes. He continued, with a hitch in his voice, I never wanted anyone to be afraid of me. He put his head to his knees and began to weep. I reached out my hand and touched his shoulder. It was as if I was touching the purest light, but I could also feel the small bit of darkness in him. I could feel the sadness. My hand on his shoulder until the tears subsided. I wish he didn't have anyone afraid of him either. When he was done, he patted my hand, then took it in his. This, he said, holding my hand in both of his, is important. Community is important. We are not meant to be alone, not all the time. I nodded. We sat like that, holding hands for a long while. The sky was turning lighter, although I could still see the stars clearly. Well, he said, I suppose it's time for us to go. Go? Go where? I have no more keys. I'm not sure where I'm supposed to go next. Why do you think I was sent here? I do more than healing, you know. I laughed. That's true. Well, let me get dressed. I woke Crow to get him out of my lap so I could put on my clothes. They were nice and warm since they had been next to the fire. Then I took up my bag and slung it across my shoulders. Standing up, stretching, I felt different and new. I'm ready for what's next. He nodded and put his hand above the fire. The fire grew smaller, then went out. I looked at Jesus, who winked. I smiled. Come with me, he said, and held out his hand. I took it, and he started towards the water. I was confused. "Have faith and keep holding my hand," he said, and he stepped on the water as if he was walking on a blue floor. I took a deep breath, nodded, and stepped onto the water after him. Where we were going I didn't know, but I knew it was where I needed to go. The Western Gate. We walked for a long time, and soon there was nothing but water around us. Crow would fly around for a while, then come back to sit on my shoulder. Jesus and I didn't talk much once we started walking on the water. We didn't need to. It was just enough to be together. At this point in my journey, it didn't really matter where we were going because I knew that whatever he was leading me to was important. I didn't need to know the destination because I came to accept that destinations were only points on the journey. As if he could hear what I was thinking, he turned to me and smiled. I smiled back. We kept walking. The sky started to darken as the sun began to set. Stars were bright in the dark sky and reflected on the water below. Eventually, the water became very still under our feet, no longer undulating. There was no moon and only stars to give light. I looked again at Jesus, but he just kept walking. Doubt was creeping in, and I wasn't sure I wanted to go where we were going. My faith kept my hand in Jesus's and my feet above water. Eventually, something tall loomed out of the darkness. From a distance, it looked like a dark rectangle against the sky, a monolith that blotted out the stars. As we got closer, I could see that it wasn't a monolith, but a gate on an island. It was large, black as night, with large black doors that reflected the starlight. It rose over us as we walked onto the shore and climbed up the slight hill towards it. Crow was quiet, but I could feel that he, too, was anticipating something. We stopped in front of the massive doors. There were carvings in the gate with words and images, but I could barely see what they were. Starlight wasn't enough to see the gates in their full glory, especially when the gate itself was blacker than the obsidian mirror that Lilith had given me. Jesus took a deep breath and spoke. "I know this door well." He raised his hand to it. "Since I died, I've brought many here. Sometimes I go with them. Sometimes they go by themselves. I know what waits beyond this door, and now you'll get a taste of what is here." What? I'm not dead, am I?" I asked, afraid. He shook his head. "No, you're not. You are here by our invitation. There are parts we can't show you, which you learned long ago, but we are bringing you here because of your gifts for your own healing. You bring people to us to go through the veil, so it's only right that you should know some of what's beyond." I nodded, still staring at the door. "It requires a sacrifice to open the door. I carry mine all the time, but you need to offer something of yourself." I didn't quite understand until he lifted his hands. The blood dripped from his wounds down onto the ground. He lowered his hands. "I leave you here then, beloved. May you find what you need." He hugged me and then turned to walk over the water and into the starry night. I watched him disappear into the darkness, then turned back to the door. Crow stood steady on my shoulder while I rummaged through my bag for the crystal knife. I held the blade in my hand and took a deep breath. And another. "Crow," I said, after taking a third breath, "is this the right thing to do?" Crow adjusted himself on my shoulder. "Big sister, I can't answer that for you. But I know you are where you need to be." Crow sounded different and wiser beyond what I'd known of him already. He seemed cautious but not afraid. I took another breath, lifted my other hand, and stabbed it with the knife. I groaned with pain and saw the blood dripping. I lifted my hand and touched the door. The door opened and I stepped over the threshold. I walked into more darkness. I felt the great doors close behind me. I continued forward with Crow, who was still as a statue on my shoulder. A mist gathered around us, and the world became gray. I smelled the earth, the water, and smoke, and other things I couldn't identify. After some time in the mists, a figure approached. They were cloaked in a black cloak, but there was a glint of steel from underneath the cloak as they moved. Crow suddenly left off my shoulder and to land in front of them. He bowed as well as a crow can, and said, "My lady." She held out her hand, and Crow dutifully perched on it. She had black leather braces and long black nails. She looked at me and said, "I am the Morgan. Thank you for taking care of my servant during your journey." "He is my friend, lady. I love him." "Yes, I see that. Fear not. He will continue your journey with you, but for now he is where he is supposed to be. Follow me." I walked behind her, and after a while we approached a field. The mist swirled around us, but as we walked further into the field, gray shapes became the bodies of soldiers. Armor, blood, gore, chainmail, swords, and all the weapons and trappings of war lay scattered. We picked our way through the bodies. There was hardly any noise beyond the moans and groans of wounded and dying soldiers. Even the other crows had decided to stay silent as they watched us from their perches in the trees. My stomach wanted to rebel, but I swallowed hard and continued to follow her through the field. She reached into her cloak. Her sword gleamed even in the mist. She held steady as she searched the field. She paused next to the body of a young soldier. He looked at her. There was a brief flash of fear before she gave him the mercy blow, but after his face was peaceful. She lifted his spirit up from his body, kissed him, and then he faded to the place beyond the veil. I stared as we both watched him leave. I was not sure exactly how I felt, but I knew what she did was right. I looked at the field stretched out in all directions, then I turned back to her. Her face was a mask, but she said, with tears in her eyes, "Did you think that mercy and compassion came without cost?" I bowed my head. "No, but there are so many." "There are always too many," she said with sorrow. We reached the end of the field. She knelt to clean her sword on her cloak. "Do you understand that this is part of your gifts? That this mercy is sometimes yours to give?" I nodded. "I don't like it, though." I could feel her irritation. "You don't have to like it," she snapped. "It's a sorrow and it's hard. This is the truth of death. I show you the reality of your fate. This isn't supposed to comfort you." I swallowed again. "I understand." She nodded, and the folds of her hood rippled like waves. "Good." She turned to Crow. "Well, little friend, are you ready to help your sister through the mists?" Crow cawed and mantled his wings. Yes, my lady." She moved her arm up, and Crow flew back onto my shoulder. She turned towards me. "Hold out your hands." I did as I was told, surprised to see that I still held the knife in my hands. My other hand was still bloody. I had forgotten that I had to make a sacrifice to get through the door. "Oh," I muttered. There was gentle laughter. "You forgot what it took to get here. It's understandable, since most do." She took the knife and laid her hands over mine. Her hands emitted a golden light that got brighter and brighter until all I could see was the light. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the light stopped. I was standing in the gray mist alone. I looked at my hands. The knife was gone, as was my bag. My other hand was whole again, except for a moon-shaped scar. As I looked at my hand in wonder, her voice echoed in the mist. "Never forget, little one. Never forget." I breathed. I breathed into the mist, looking at the scar on my hand. I wasn't sure if I could continue. These lessons were hard. But I was also here, now, and the only way I could go was forward. Crow flexed his talons into my shoulder and bobbed his head. I took a step, then another, and another. The mist and gravel gave way to stars and meadow. It was still night, but I could still see clearly. A path formed in front of us that meandered through the forest. As we entered the forest proper, I could feel the trees listening. It felt close and dark, and not necessarily safe. Crow was still quiet, and I couldn't blame him for that. It was the kind of place where it felt wrong to talk. A dark figure moved out from the trees. "You are afraid of me." It wasn't a question, although I was compelled to answer weakly, "Yes." She beckoned with her hand and led us to her cauldron. She stirred it 3 times when we reached it, then sat. She offered me a stool opposite the cauldron and said, "Sit." I sat. "Stir." I began to stir the cauldron. The smell was enticing and repulsive all at once. I couldn't describe it as anything remotely of our world. It glowed, but it was deep and dark, like a starry night in a field far from city lights. She smiled at me, and I felt warm. "I will tell you a truth." She paused. I stirred. There are many stories about me, Caradwin, and Guriambach, but who he was, what he became, and my role in it. You are familiar, yes? I nodded. I stirred. Good. Now I told him to stir the cauldron just like you are now. He was a frightened little boy. He was so worried about disappointing me and stirred so carefully that little things made him jump. I tried to tell him to relax, but he didn't. He couldn't let go. He was so tense that even the littlest things frightened him. One day I dropped my shoe, and he jumped so hard that he got 3 drops of this potion on him, gaining the knowledge and wisdom that was far beyond his years. With his eyes now opened, he tried to hide from it, so he ran. She paused. I stirred. Of course I chased him. I wanted to help him, to teach him what he needed to know to control the knowledge and emotions that plagued him. I was angry, too, because I was so busy with my own duties, not to see how far my hireling had regressed. So I chased him and swallowed him. I stirred. In my womb, he learned that what I couldn't teach him as Gwion. He became Taliesin, and was great in knowledge, wisdom, and love. But do you know, my child, which lesson he really learned? I shook my head, then looked into her eyes, as if she was staring straight into my soul. I looked away, and in doing that I fumbled with the great spoon used to stir the cauldron. I felt fear, anger at my clumsiness, humiliation at my failure, embarrassment. I was so caught up in my emotions that I hadn't noticed the single drop of hot potion landing on my hand until it started to burn. I began to panic. I could feel what Gwion had felt, and I understood why he had to run. I could feel the clarity. I could see all of myself, all of the emotions that were open, and all that were buried. I started to take a step backwards, away from the cauldron. I looked up at her, eyes wide, and she grinned. I took another step, and another. Before I knew it, I had turned and started running. Go ahead, run. You can't hide from me, nor can you hide from yourself, she yelled. I suddenly heard the flapping of large wings behind me and made the mistake of turning around. The goddess had turned herself into an enormous hawk with great wings that created a strong wind. As she saw me turn, she took the opportunity to pounce on me and pin me to the ground. I will consume you. I screamed to Crow to fly away as her talons pierced my flesh, and then everything went dark. Ah, so you have finally come to me. Who? My sister really stripped you bare. At least Inanna had more of a choice of how her skin came off. Well, come on then, wake up. Inanna? There was still darkness all around me. Get up. Wasn't I dead? There came a cackle in the darkness. Of course you are. But you're with me, and you have Hekate's mark on you, so I suppose you could say that you're not completely dead, just mostly dead. The cackle became full laughter. I didn't know what to say. I couldn't feel my body, and I didn't know if I had eyes or not. I willed myself to see. Mostly dead. Sounds like something from a movie. The goddess laughed again, then said, Death is a strange and funny mystery, my love. People just don't realize it. I wasn't sure how to respond to that. What I knew about death was from my experiences in the mundane world, and I knew that I wasn't back in the mundane world yet. So, she said, have you figured out who I am? I noticed that the darkness was starting to dissipate, and I was beginning to feel more awake in the sense that I could see and feel things around me. The light stayed low and gloomy, although I could see that there was a large hall with a dais at one end. In the center of the dais was a large throne with a dark figure on it. I could barely make out their features from where I was in the middle of the hall. I realized I was laying on the floor and that maybe, for politeness' sake, I should probably stand up. I willed my body to move, and when it did, all I heard were rattling sounds. When I got to my feet, I raised my hands to my face. They were just bones. Yes, my child, you are mostly dead, as you can see. A lot like my sister behind you. An old hand from the throne gestured behind me. Hanging from a hook was another set of bones, arms crossed in front of her, as if sleeping in a tomb. Finally, my memories seemed to catch up with me. I turned back to the throne with a rattle. I bowed low. My Lady Ereshkigal. Very good. Now, tell me why you are here and why you have suffered the wrath of Caradwyn. I rose from my bow. I knew with her I could not lie. There was no hiding here. I wasn't sure where to start, so I would start from the beginning. I cleared my throat, even though I technically didn't have one anymore, and told her of my journey up until that point. I told her about meeting Crow and Hecate, the keys and the cities I had visited. I told her of Jesus and the journey through the gate. She listened quietly from her throne. When I finished, she looked at me for a long time. You have had quite the journey to get here, with many powerful experiences. But there were many paths you could have taken in this realm. There are many paths from the tree. So I ask again, why are you here? I closed my mouth with a rattle. I was suddenly unsure. Why was I here? I came here all the way from the mundane world for what? To become a bag of bones? I know when I started I just wanted knowledge and to write down the knowledge I had gained to share with others, but now I wasn't so sure. Who was I really doing all this for? I could feel her eyes on me as I thought things through. I wondered if she could read my mind. Of course I can, she said, but I want you to say it out loud. If I had still had a real mouth and throat, I would have gulped. I took a deep breath, out of habit, and said, I came because I wanted to feel special, to feel like I had knowledge no one else had. I thought I could get recognition if I wrote it all in a book and published it. I wanted to leave something behind for when I'm actually dead in the mundane world. I wanted to know what was really beyond the veil. She rose from her throne, then suddenly she was standing before me. She looked like a desiccated human wearing fine blood-red robes and gold jewelry. The suddenness of her presence startled me and made me jump, rattling my bones. I lifted my head and looked her in the eyes, which were like two fiery pits. Her face made me gasp in awe. It held a strange beauty that enthralled me. Ereshkigal raised her eyebrows. You were not frightened by my appearance? No, I answered honestly. Should I be? Most people are. Most people don't want to stare death in the face, for that is what I am. I am the queen of death, and then of the underworld. I wait for spirits to come to me, and I always wait for my sister to come and go. She comes in many guises and always brings other spirits along with her. Most of these spirits are usually scared of my presence and of what I might do. It's hard for them to give up all of themselves to come here, and harder still for them to lay themselves bare before my throne. Yet here you are. You took the long way around to come to my hall. You came through earth, air, fire, and water. You gave comfort to a god and let him lead you to the gates of what his followers would call hell. Do you think so little of yourself to not see the work you have done to get here? You came here of your own free will, just so you could know and teach others. All humans want to be special. That is the way of your kind. But that was not your sole motivation. You stand before me, not cowering in fear, but curious about my realm and what lies beyond. She paused and smiled. You also see me as beautiful, not ugly as most others do. That makes you special to me. If I had skin, I would have blushed. I hadn't thought of it that way. I never really considered myself special, and I've always tried to get validation that I was worthy from other sources. I did come on this journey for my own selfish reasons, but she was right. I came here of my own will. I continued on the journey because I wanted to, not because I had an obligation to. I did want to leave something behind for the future, and I wasn't afraid of death or her. I was more afraid of the how of my own death, and that I didn't want to leave the mortal world too soon. She gave a small laugh. I looked back at her. Her expression softened, as did her face, and instead of a carcass, she became an ageless woman in the same blood-red robes and jewelry and a golden crown. She reached up to touch my cheek. Don't worry about your legacy, my love. You will be remembered. We will work together, you and I, to ensure that. I know you worry about the future and how you will die, but you can't dwell on these things. You will forget to live the life you have, if you do. Just rest assured that I will be there when it happens. All of us will. Thank you, I whispered. You're welcome. She stepped back and drew herself up to her full height. Now, take your bones and go. You can't stay here much longer. Those who are living can't stay in my realm long and still remain among the living. Take my sister with you, please. She'll lead you to where you need to be. Besides, it's time for her to leave, too." With a wave of her arm and a flash of light, she disappeared. I heard a soft thump behind me. I turned around to see a beautiful woman with long black hair lying on the floor. She was no longer just bones. I held up my hands and saw that I, too, had a body again. I nearly danced with joy, feeling strangely light and free. I went over to the woman, who I knew was Inanna, and she began to stir. "Are you all right?" I asked. "Yes, thank you," she replied. "Could you help me up? I've been bones for so long, I don't know if I can stand on my own." I nodded and helped her to stand. Inanna took a look around the hall. "So, my sister finally decided to let me go." "Yes," I said. "She said we were to leave the hall. She told me to take you with me." "Interesting," she said, taking a good look at me. "Well, that doesn't happen very often." She smiled at me, and the smile seemed to dispel the gloom in the hall. I smiled back. "Yes, it's not very often a human gets to bring me back. Well, shall we go then?" The goddess took my hand and led me to the end of the hall opposite the throne. We left the gloom of the hall through gilded doors. The return. Inanna held my hand as we climbed a set of stairs upwards through the dark. The stairs felt familiar to me, as if I had climbed them before. The dark was broken every so often by a small lamp. We climbed in silence. What was there to say after being bones together? The stairs finally came to a door guarded by a knight in armor that was black as night at the new moon. I thought he was a statue until Inanna spoke to him. "I am the Queen of Heaven, and my sister is the Queen of the Underworld. You will let us pass," she demanded. The knight turned his head, and a deep voice answered, "I know who you are, my lady. Since my liege lady has let you come this far, then I will let you pass. Is this human coming with you?" I could feel his eyes on me, trying to decide if I was a friend or an enemy. I held on to Inanna's hand more tightly. She patted my shoulder with her free hand and said, "Yes, my sister told this human to bring me back to the light." I felt a moment of surprise from the knight, and then he stepped to the side of the door. "Well, human, you have been given a great honor. You both may pass and reclaim your lives." He touched the door, and it slowly opened. "Come," said Inanna, and we walked over the threshold. As soon as we stepped through, the door behind us closed. Light erupted from lamps all around what looked like an old castle ballroom. As the lights came up, my body began to feel more solid, more real. I could feel the muscles in my arms and legs actually holding me up again. I felt alive. I turned towards Inanna, and she, too, seemed more real and solid. She smiled. "Ah, feels good to have my full flesh back again," she said. I nodded. "Now what?" I asked. "We moved to the next gate." "Where's the next gate?" "Come," was all she said. She took my hand, and we eventually came to a large white marble door inlaid with gold. The design was breathtakingly beautiful, and while I appreciated its craftsmanship, I didn't feel anything else from it. I looked at my companion, and she motioned me to open the door. This door, too, opened slowly, and as we crossed the threshold, I could feel all my happiness, joy, and wonder fill my body. I looked at the doors again, and this time their beauty moved me to tears. I smiled, both a sad and happy smile, as we moved forward and the gate closed after us. We stopped after a short way in, and Inanna and I took the time to collect ourselves and adjust to the emotions we had just regained. We hugged each other and let each other weep for a moment. When we were done, I looked around, and we were standing in a field of grass. There was light coming from somewhere high above, but when I looked up, I could see we were in a very large cavern. Inanna pointed to a white archway at the far end of the field. We walked on. The archway was much taller than either of us, and there was a person in white standing at the center of it. We approached the being, and it spoke to us. "I am the guardian of the 5th gate. While Inanna may come and go as she pleases, you must understand, human, that once you pass this gate, you must return to the mortal world as soon as you can. You have protections in this realm, but they are only temporary. Do you understand and accept this?" "I do." "Then you may pass." The being stepped aside, and we walked through the arch. As soon as we stepped through, I suddenly took a deep breath in and coughed, and blinked. and realized I was hungry. I turned to Inanna after the coughing stopped. How could I move and walk in there if I couldn't breathe? She chuckled. Well, you were dead after a fashion. Now you're not. Here, you'll be cold in a minute. And she handed me a dress. I was confused for a moment, but then I looked down and realized that I was still quite naked. You humans are so funny about modesty, but on the practical side, you do get cold, unlike us. Thank you. I unfolded the dress, which was more like a robe with black Celtic knotwork on the hems. I pulled it over my body and started to feel much warmer. The room was full of clothes, jewels, money, and the other trappings of wealth. Inanna, too, dressed in robes of indigo, gold, and white. She looked at herself in the mirror and said, Well, that's much better. I may not get cold and don't really need clothes, but they are fun, aren't they? I agreed. Shall we move on, then? She took my hand, pointed at the door, and we walked through it. We stepped onto a stone floor, and as our feet touched it, lamps illuminated another great hall. There were many beings there. Some looked like humans, some did not. In front of us was a great throne. Inanna let go of my hand and sat on it. She beckoned me with her hand, and I moved to stand next to the throne. 2 ladies in waiting stepped up to the dais and curtsied. One was holding a scepter, and the other a crown of stars. They approached Inanna, and the Queen of Heaven took the crown and placed it on her head. She then took the scepter and held it upright. My friends, we have returned to you after much trial. We are glad to be among you again. And now you may be wondering who this human is who has accompanied us. She, too, has faced the trials of Ereshkigal and braved her wrath. She then had the courage to bring us back to you. You will honor her. There erupted a mighty cheer. I didn't know what to do except their praise. Inanna smiled at me, and while the cheers were still going on, she beckoned another servant to come forward. The servant walked up to the dais, bowed, and stood in front of me. They unbuckled something at their waist and handed it to me with another bow. I took it, and to my surprise, it was the knife of air that the Morrigan had taken from me. Then another servant came, carrying the bag I had brought with me. I turned to Inanna to thank her, and she held up her hand. The cheering stopped as she spoke. Child, I give back to you what is yours. Remember well the power that is entrusted to you as you wield it. I will. She nodded. We must now lead our friend through the gates. We shall return soon. Inanna stood again, took my hand, and led me to a set of doors at the end of the hall. She touched her scepter to it, and it opened. I walked through the door and into a room that had a low light. On the walls there were mirrors of all shapes and sizes. Some were round, some were square. Some were large, and others were barely the size of my hand. I walked further into the room, and the door shut behind us. Inanna moved with me, her robes rustling in the quiet. Go on, look, she said. I went up to one of the larger mirrors and looked at myself. I looked similar to how I looked before, but I could see there were many differences. There was a wisdom in my eyes that hadn't been there before. I remembered now that I had chosen to come, chosen to gain this new knowledge, and that wisdom reflected all that I had come through to be here in this hall of mirrors. Inanna spoke. Some say the second gate is where you regain your strength, but the truth is that you are made to look at yourself and realize that the strength was with you all along. You just didn't realize it. Always remember that if you don't feel strong in your times of deepest despair, you will find in yourself the strength to move forward. She paused. And now it is time for you to go through the first gate and leave the Western realm. She walked forward. I followed behind her to the largest mirror in the room. She again raised her scepter. The mirror disappeared, and a doorway was in its place. We stepped forward. When we emerged from the last gate, we came out on a hillside on the western road above a forest. I could see the beach in the distance, and it felt to me like it was a very long time since I had walked into the waves. I felt humbled. There was so much more to this world than I had ever imagined, but I could feel that my time here was growing short. Inanna put her hand on my shoulder, breaking me out of my reverie. You realize that because you have been to Ereshkigal's realm, you can never fully reclaim your innocence, that you are forever changed. I understand. She smiled at me again and kissed my forehead. This is the lesson of the first gate. Thank you for bringing me back to myself. I took a deep breath and said, Thank you for helping me come back too. It was then that I remembered that my feathered companion wasn't there. I asked Inanna, as she turned to walk back through the gate, Do you know where Crow is? We got separated when Caradon chased after me. Don't worry, my dear. Your friend is fine. You'll see. She walked back through the gate, and the gate disappeared once it closed. I sat on the grassy hillside and waited for whatever came next. The forest. The sun was setting. I was getting impatient and cold, so I decided to walk down the hill into the forest to find some soft leafy ground to sleep on. The robes that Inanna had given me had kept me warm enough, and there were no sharp rocks to cut my bare feet. I felt drawn to the forest below. Twilight deepened as I entered the tree line, making it much darker than it was in the open grass, but I could still make out the path in the half-light. I felt the call and pull of something on that path, which felt right, so I kept walking. I came to a clearing full of soft grass and flowers. I stood still for a moment, taking in the quiet of the forest. I felt at peace. I looked around me and just waited for whatever was coming next. Suddenly there was a mad flapping of wings in the air and a cacophony of cawing. I recognized the sound and held out my arm. Big sister, Crow called. I was looking all over for you with my brothers and sisters, but then he told me I would find you here. Oh, Crow, it's so good to see you again. I missed you so much, I cried, as Crow landed on my arm. I pulled him in and petted him. He butted his head against my chin and nibbled at my hair. I smiled. Who said I was here? I think the little fellow means me, a deep voice rumbled behind me. I turned around. Before me stood a large man with a big pot belly carrying a staff and a harp. Crow cawed and flapped away, as I immediately fell to my knees. My lord! The Dagda chuckled, which sounded more like falling rocks than laughter. Daughter, are you that afraid of me? No, I stammered. He laughed again. Well, I suppose in some ways you should be. He winked. Go on, get up. I know you kneel out of respect. I was just making sure you hadn't completely lost your wits in the underworld. You've been through a lot, and there's a bit more road to travel. He reached out his hand, and I took it, and stood. Did I not tell you she'd be here, little friend? He said to Crow, who was once again on my shoulder. You did, Crow answered. She's my big sister. Is she now? How wonderful. The Dagda smiled at Crow. Ah, daughter, there are many places I can take you from here, but your journey has been a long one, and you have been through enough. But there's so much to learn. I know there is, but you can't stay here. Not yet. This realm is not safe for you to stay in for too long while you still have mortal flesh. I nodded. I knew he was right, but this realm was so full of knowledge, truth, and beauty. I'd like nothing more than to have you with me, daughter, but it's not your time. Now you need to finish this and go home. Tell others what you have found here. Teach the truths that you have found here. I nodded again. I will. He gestured with a great flourish, and his cauldron appeared with a table full of food and some comfortable chairs. He laughed a deep, hearty laugh that seemed to come from the earth, which made his large belly jiggle. Come, no need for sadness. Let us feast, make music, and tell stories this night, and in the morning I will bring you back to where you started, eh? What say you, Brother Crow? Crow let out a mighty caw and danced on my shoulder. Yes! That settles it then. Come eat and tell me of your journey. He began to ladle stew from his great cauldron, and I told him my tale as the night deepened. We talked for hours. I talked to him not only about my journey, but about my life in the mortal world, about the fears and the worries, the joys and the surprises, the pain and sorrow. He listened as a friend, a lover, and a parent. He understood me in a way many in the real world did not. But I could feel the pull of mortal time, and as the sky began to lighten, I knew that there wasn't much time left. I finished talking, and we sat in silence for a time. He then picked up his harp and played a song. "O daughter mine, O silly girl, you are a wonder to behold. Full of life, full of light, come cook me something to delight. Come and tell me stories until you see the morning light, for you are a wonder and my delight." You just made that up. The Dagda smiled. Of course I did, but every word is true. Come, it's time to go. I stood, and with another flourish of his hands, the table, the cauldron, and all the food disappeared. In its place, a large club-like staff appeared. It was beautifully carved. The carving was so well done, it looked as if it had been carved by wind and water instead of hands. We walked again on the path through the forest. The trees clustered around and became more like a tunnel. The light under the trees was dim, but I could see bright light where the forest ended. When we reached the edge of the trees, I recognized where we were. In the distance, the great tree was standing tall and proud in the middle of the crossroads. Part of me didn't want to go back, but I also was drawn to the tree as if being pulled. Crow flew into the air from my shoulder towards the plain where the tree and crossroads were. The Dagda put a hand on my shoulder before I moved forward. This is where I leave you. You always know how to find me if you need me. He smiled. I sighed, a little sad to leave his company. He put a hand under my chin so I could look into his eyes. Never doubt that I will always be here for you, he said, his eyes like the still water of a pond. You are my daughter and always will be. She'll be there for you too. And he pointed his thumb at the great tree where I had talked to Hecate. But you already knew that. When you are done with the mortal life, we will feast again, and I will show you wonders that you can barely imagine. He lowered his hand. Off with you now. I have work to do, and so do you. He shoved me out of the forest with the healing end of his club, and something inside me changed. I wasn't sure what, but when I turned to ask him what he had done, he was gone. I took a deep breath and walked forward. The beginning. I walked out into the plain, following Crow's flight to the tree. I could see the original set of stones where the deities had waited for me when I first started this journey. I took my time. I wanted to savor the last moments I had here. I also reflected on the journey, above, below, within. I became a priest of the earth and a priest of water. I saw my death in a glimpse of the beyond. I flew like Crow and had dinner with the Dagda. I learned much and saw many things of great beauty. I felt fulfilled, at peace. I finally reached the stones. They were empty now, save one. I sat down next to her. She smiled. Will I remember everything when I go back? I asked. Of course you will. We wanted you to write about this journey, did we not? It will help you remember, but it will help others find some truths as well. You wouldn't have been sent on this journey if we just wanted you to forget it all. I nodded. Don't be sad, child. We will never leave you. You know us even better now, so you can call on us whenever you have need of us. If we thought you unworthy of our attention, we wouldn't have called you here. Crow flew down from the tree then and landed in front of us. I held out my hands and he hopped into them. I will miss being with you all the time, big sister. I will come when you call, though. I teared up and nuzzled him with my chin. He nuzzled me back, flapped his wings, cawed, and returned to the branches of the tree. I could again feel the pull of the mortal world tugging at me. I looked to Hecate. How do I go back? She rose from her seat and held out her hand. Come, she said. I took her hand and she led me to the great tree. On the side of the massive trunk stood a large door, intricately carved with all the things that made up the mortal world. Woods, trees, musical instruments, sculptures, cars, computers, and many other things. We stood in front of it. The door started to open, a glowing portal that burst into life. I'm afraid to go back, I said. I know you are, but it is time for you to go. You cannot stay here. Hecate took my face in her hands. I couldn't see all of her face, and was mostly hidden by the cowl of her robe. Oh, my child, I can't promise that everything will be easy when you go back. It will be hard for you after this journey. Remember the lessons you've learned here and write them well. Remember that we, all of us, are never far away from you. Remember to live, to laugh, and to love, and not dwell so much on what lies beyond. Remember us all, and teach others. This is our gift to you and the mortal world. And when you leave the mortal world, we will be waiting for you here, and we will take you on the next journey. She hugged me. I understood. I could only visit here while I still had a mortal life, and I wasn't done with that life yet. I smiled, and her smile at me felt like the warm sun after a long winter. I turned toward the portal and walked through it. in perfect love and perfect trust. This was my journey. You have now shared it with me within these pages. If you have found some moment of truth, some inspiration, or even some sense of peace, then the work was well done and the spirits are pleased. If it amused you, made you smile, made you think or wonder, then that too is the work of the spirits. It was their idea from the beginning. I was just their instrument. Go in peace and blessed be. You have been listening to Tales from Flat Space. If you want to support me and my writing, there are many ways to do it. Follow me on my Twitch channel, become a patron, share this podcast, or buy my books. All you have to do is go to revginapon.net and click on the relevant links. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you next time.